would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. In today's film story, we're going to focus on Gravity, the 2013 film by Alfonso Cuarón that swept all of the plaudits, the cash, the awards in that particular year. The film, which starred Sandra Bullock and George Clooney and centered on the plight of a NASA astronaut marooned in space, was made on a budget of $100 million and made over $700 million back worldwide. It won 7 Oscars, including cinematography, directing, editing, and visual effects. And the visual effects in particular were just sensational. This was 2013, just at the tail end of the 3D boom kickstarted by Avatar in 2009. And you really got the feeling when watching Gravity, well, I certainly did, that much like Avatar, you were watching something conceived and designed for this format. A concept that really worked to the strengths of 3D rather than a bolt-on conversion that was just put out there to increase revenue. The film also won a clutch of BAFTAs, including the award for Best British Film or Outstanding British Film, and that in itself sparked something of a, if not a controversy, then at least a conversation about what it means to be a British film. And that's what this week's film story is all about. I mean, we could have spent the episode talking about Gravity's technical achievements, and they are many, and maybe we'll come back to that at some point in the future. But this week's episode then is about the kind of post-release conversation about what constituted a British film. Because of Gravity's designation as a British film and its subsequent BAFTA win for Best British Film, that would really cause some concern behind the scenes about the nature of British film designation and the rationale behind it. So first of all, let's look at how a film made by a Mexican director with 2 Hollywood-based American stars telling a story set in space, which is definitely not part of the British Isles, could come to be designated as British. Well, let's first hear it explained by Sandra Bullock, who starred in the film.
This entire film was shot in England with an English crew, so it's pretty much an English film. So that's what's so nice about being here and recognizing everyone that worked so hard on it in England.
There you go. Thank you, Sandra. So that decision ultimately about whether a film qualifies as being British by designation is made by the BFI, the British Film Institute, and it works on a point-based system that any film wishing to qualify as British has to measure itself against. It's a cultural test. Now, all being well, you'll see the relevant areas of point scoring on the screen in front of you right now. So out of a possible 35 points up for grabs in terms of a film's quantifiable Britishness, ranging from the nationality of the director, producers, cast and crew, through to subject matter, cultural heritage links, Gravity scored at least 16 out of the 35, that being the magic number to qualify as a British film under BFI rules. So it's not just qualification for the Best British Film award at the BAFTAs that persuades producers to aim for that BFI certified British box tick. Though, getting clearance in that area then entitles, by my understanding at least, then it entitles producers to access the not inconsiderable tax breaks that the UK offers when it comes to filmmaking. And we're talking about 20% of your budget here. So to a film like Gravity that cost a substantial amount of money, that kind of tax break is worth around $20 million, a rather hefty chunk of change by anyone's standards. And if we're really honest, this is why certain productions are keen to position themselves as British films. It's one of the reasons that the UK is amongst the most popular destinations in the world for major filmmaking ventures. Just think back to George Osborne's smiling mug at around the time 2015 when The Force Awakens came out, the newest of the Star Wars sequels, and he got a credit on that film, and that was because he'd arranged special tax breaks with Disney. So the UK is a popular destination for major filmmaking ventures. But of course, the reverse of that is what effect is that having on British film and the preserving British culture in film when we have major blockbusters like Gravity, which through a spurious means or non-spurious means, depending on which sort of offence you fall, can call themselves British. So it was argued at the time that perhaps this was a flaw in the system. Those tax breaks, it claimed, were incentives that were originally introduced, and this is the key part, I suppose. Those tax breaks were originally introduced, it's claimed, to preserve the identity of British film. If Hollywood productions are able to take regular advantage of those tax breaks, though, simply put, they will. And they do. Edgar Wright has spoken in the past, the British director, about how mid-sized UK productions can struggle to find studio space in Britain because Hollywood productions are taking up all the available facilities. And that sounds dangerously like the opposite, I suppose, of preserving the identity of British film. When British filmmakers can't actually access their own country's facilities. Matthew Vaughn, the director of the Kingsman films, has gone even further, and he said that the British film industry effectively may as well not exist because it's so dependent now on external investment from Hollywood that it's not self-sustainable and therefore not an industry in and of itself. Some people have called for the BAFTAs to discontinue the practice of allowing Hollywood blockbusters to be considered for the outstanding British film, even if they have passed the BFI cultural test. And it's not like the case of Gravity was an isolated incident either. And 2 years later, Brooklyn would win the same award for a film set in the District of New York. Another 2 years later, Three Billboards, a cracking film, would do the same. Again winning outstanding British film, despite being made by an Irish director and featuring American actors, a US-based setting, and a US-based story. I mean, there's no doubt, ultimately, that Gravity is a very fine film. It's a very enjoyable watch, and was completely worthy of the many plaudits that it received, and the awards it received too. And it is undoubtedly fantastic. The British crews and visual effects teams from Britain were able to have their hard work and their talent recognised by receiving a British award. A British product. Is Gravity a British product? Probably. Certainly by the BFI cultural test it is. But is it culturally British? And that's where the argument perhaps mounted up against it at the time. And this isn't just a BAFTA issue either, I suppose. If the argument goes, if the preservation of the identity of British cinema is truly paramount to the government, but they're determined to continue down the route of tax breaks rather than, say, adopt the French model of pushing profits back into homegrown film, then I suppose the argument follows that if the government are pushing on tax breaks and not looking at alternative means, then it's up to everybody else to make sure that they back British film, including BAFTA, TV, streaming, cable networks need to commit to showcasing British film. Multiplexes need to engage with British film, perhaps to a greater degree than they already do. Film fans themselves need to support British film by paying to watch it. And BAFTA, who have in the years since Gravity's win, been urged on more than one occasion to review their awarding policies, but as yet that hasn't happened. Of course, this year BAFTA also kind of found themselves in the midst of an awards controversy because they gave Roma the award for top film, and that led to several cinema chains claiming they would be pulling out their support for the show because the BAFTAs were supporting essentially a Netflix production, which is, I suppose, to cinemas is seen as the enemy of the cinema industry. So all kinds of difficult decisions that BAFTA has to navigate, and they do a difficult job and a good job, it must be said. But it's interesting times we live in with those kind of choices to make, and of course I leave it up to you, and you can do this by simply looking at your local cinema listings. Leave it up to you to decide just what state British film is in. There's a good argument that it's in a rude health with lots of films on the horizon, but is that helped by films like Gravity, scooping up those British awards? That, of course, is the issue at the heart of it. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Film Stories, a little bit different this week. focusing on a very specific or niche area of the film story. But I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Please do like, subscribe, comment. It's a really interesting topic. I'd love to hear your views on it. I really would. And do, of course, check out latest issue of Film Stories print magazine. If you want to also hear more film stories, you can find us. You can find Simon's podcast at your podcast receptacle of choice. On top of that, you can also find us on Twitter at filmstories.pod, on Facebook at Film Stories Online, and of course on our websites, where we constantly update with new film news, reviews, etc. at filmstories.co.uk. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you back here next week with another film story. Bye bye now.